She was 4 years old, 3 feet 10 inches tall, 90 pounds. She had small braids tied with colorful bows and barrettes, the kind that bounce when a little girl runs and plays. She could read simple words. She could count to 30. She loved SpongeBob SquarePants. She had pierced ears and a birthmark shaped like a seashell on her arm. Her name was Kynande, pronounced kee-NAHN-day, and when a witness asked her about the bruises on her face and shoulder, this 4-year-old child looked up and said 3 words that would haunt everyone who heard them. "My mommy did it." Days later, on September 29, 2002, Kynande disappeared. Her mother claimed she vanished at a Kmart in Whiteville, North Carolina, but surveillance cameras never captured her image. No one remembered seeing her, and when police searched the family apartment, they found it reeking of bleach, with Kynande's toys and clothes already thrown away, as if someone knew she would never be coming home. This is the story of a little girl who was failed by the very people who should have protected her. And more than 2 decades later, no one knows where she is. This is Cold Case Unsealed. Before we dive into this heartbreaking case, if you believe that every child deserves justice, if you think those who harm the most vulnerable among us should be held accountable, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. We uncover the cases that involve our most innocent victims, the children who couldn't defend themselves, who trusted the wrong people, who deserved so much better than what they got. Your support helps us keep their stories alive and keeps pressure on these cases. Now let's talk about what really happened to Kynande. September 29, 2002, Whiteville, North Carolina, a Kmart store at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. According to Vartasha McCullough, this is where her 4-year-old daughter Kynande vanished, just disappeared in the aisles of a department store. One moment she was there, the next moment she was gone. It's every parent's nightmare, losing sight of your child in a crowded store. That moment of panic when you turn around and they're not where you thought they were. But this story, this claim, this entire narrative about a little girl disappearing from Kmart would unravel almost immediately. Because when investigators started asking questions, when they started checking surveillance footage, when they started talking to witnesses, nothing added up. Not a single thing about Vartasha's story made sense. Let me tell you about Kynande first, because before she became a missing child, before she became a case file and a statistic, she was a person. She was a little girl with a bright mind and a sweet personality. 4 years old and already reading simple words. Counting to 30. She was intelligent, well-mannered, the kind of child teachers love to have in their classroom. She had a light complexion, brown hair styled in those small braids that take hours to put in, each one carefully tied with a bow or barrette. She had brown eyes that should have seen so much more of life than they did. She had pierced ears, and she had that distinctive birthmark on her arm, shaped like a seashell, a unique identifying mark that would become crucial in the investigation. She loved SpongeBob SquarePants. Think about that for a moment. She was a normal 4-year-old who watched cartoons and laughed at the antics of a talking sponge who lived in a pineapple under the sea. She was a child who should have been playing, learning, growing, experiencing all the wonder and joy that childhood should bring. Instead, in the days before she disappeared, witnesses saw something that no child should ever experience. Bruises, cuts, marks that looked like they'd been caused by a strap, injuries on her face, on her shoulder, on her body. And when one witness had the courage to ask this 4-year-old child what happened, Kynande told the truth. 3 simple, devastating words. "My mommy did it." The witness confronted Vartasha McCullough about the bruises. And Vartasha's response? Not denial, not concern for her daughter, not shame or remorse. No, her response was a threat. "I'm going to whip her ass for telling you." Think about that. A 4-year-old child tells the truth about being abused, and her mother's response is to threaten to hurt her more for talking. This wasn't a parent who made a mistake and felt guilty. This wasn't someone who lost their temper once and immediately regretted it. This was a pattern. This was control. This was a parent who saw nothing wrong with beating a 4-year-old and everything wrong with that 4-year-old telling anyone about it. Kynande's grandparents knew something was wrong. They were worried about their granddaughter. They could see the signs, the injuries, the fear. And on September 29, 2002, the same day Kynande was reported missing, her grandparents went to police in Conway, South Carolina, where Kynande lived with her parents. They told police they believed Kynande was being abused. They were trying to protect her. They were trying to get help for her. But they were too late. because by the time they went to police, Kynande was already gone. Let's examine Vartash's story about what happened because it changed almost immediately, and those changes are telling. At first, she said she was in Kmart with Kynande and the child disappeared in an aisle of the store, just vanished while they were shopping. But then she changed her story. The new version was that she walked into the store and thought Kynande was behind her, but when she turned around, the child was gone. These aren't minor differences. These are two completely different scenarios. In the first version, they were both inside the store together, shopping, and Kynande wandered off or was taken from an aisle. In the second version, Vartasha went into the store assuming Kynande was following her, and only realized once inside that the child wasn't there. The second story suggests Kynande might have disappeared from the parking lot, or might never have made it out of the car, or might not have been there at all. Why would someone change their story like that? Usually, it's because the first story didn't match the evidence, and they had to adjust their lie to account for facts they didn't know would be checked. And that's exactly what happened here. Nobody remembered seeing Kynande in Kmart that day. Not employees, not other shoppers. Nobody. In a store where a 4-year-old girl suddenly disappeared, where you'd think people would remember seeing her before she vanished, where employees would be questioned about whether they noticed a child alone or crying or seeming lost. Nobody had any memory of seeing this little girl. But more damning than the absence of witnesses was the presence of technology. Kmart, like most retail stores, had video surveillance. Cameras covering the entrance, the exits, the aisles. If Kynande had been in that store, the cameras would have captured her. If she'd walked in with her mother or behind her mother, there would be footage. If she'd been in the aisles before disappearing, there would be footage. There was no footage. The surveillance images from that day, from that time, showed no sign of Kynande. Not entering the store, not in the aisles, not anywhere. The cameras didn't lie. Kynande was never in that Kmart. So if she wasn't at Kmart, where was she? The answer to that question would lead investigators to a crime scene that would make even seasoned detectives sick to their stomachs. But first, let's talk about the day itself, September 29th, and the story Vartasha and Kevin, Kynande's father, told about what they were doing. They said they lived in Conway, South Carolina, and were visiting Kynande's uncle in Whiteville, North Carolina that day. It's about a 45-mile drive, roughly an hour depending on traffic. They said they brought Kynande with them on this trip to visit family. When police searched the couple's car, they found something very telling. Or rather, they didn't find something. There was no car seat. Kynande was 4 years old. In 2002, car seat laws required that children of that age and size be in proper restraints. But there was no car seat in the vehicle. No booster seat. No evidence that there had been one recently. In fact, there was almost no evidence that a young child had been in that car at all. The only thing investigators found that suggested a child's presence was a single Matchbox car wedged under a seat. One toy. That's it.
No juice boxes, no snack wrappers, no crayons, no books, no blanket, no stuffed animal.
Nothing that you'd typically find in a car that regularly transports a 4-year-old child. Think about that for a moment. If you have children or know anyone with children, think about what their car looks like. There are crumbs on the seats. There are toys scattered around. There are sippy cups in the cup holders. There's evidence everywhere that a child rides in that vehicle. But this car? Almost nothing. As if no child had been there in a very long time. The investigation expanded. Detectives started looking for anyone who could confirm that Kynande had actually made the trip to North Carolina on September 29th. They interviewed the uncle she was supposedly visiting. They canvassed the area around his home. They checked gas stations and rest stops along the route between Conway and Whiteville. They asked everyone they could find, "Did you see this little girl on September 29th?" No one had. In fact, investigators couldn't find a single person, other than Vartasha and Kevin, who reported seeing Kynande in the 2 days before she was reported missing. Not neighbors in Conway, not relatives in North Carolina, not store clerks, not random passersby, not anyone. It was as if Kynande had ceased to exist 2 days before her mother reported her missing from Kmart. Where was she during those 2 days? What happened to her? The answer lay not in Whiteville, North Carolina, where Vartasha claimed she disappeared, but back in Conway, South Carolina, in the apartment where Kynande lived with her parents. When police obtained a search warrant for that apartment, they knew they were looking for evidence of foul play. What they found was even worse than they'd anticipated. The moment they walked in, they could smell it. Bleach. The apartment reeked of bleach. That sharp, chemical smell that burns your nostrils and makes your eyes water. It wasn't the normal clean smell of a recently tidied home. This was overpowering, the kind of smell that comes from using excessive amounts of bleach, from scrubbing surfaces over and over, from trying to eliminate every trace of something. Investigators found 3 bottles of bleach in the apartment. 3. They found a damp mop. They found wet towels. Everything pointed to a frantic, recent, intensive cleaning effort. When they asked Vartasha about it, she had an explanation ready. She said she was cleaning the apartment in preparation for an upcoming inspection by the housing authority. She was just trying to make sure everything was spotless for the inspection. But investigators didn't believe her. This wasn't normal cleaning. This was what they call sanitizing a crime scene. This was someone trying to eliminate evidence. This was someone trying to destroy any traces of what had happened in that apartment. And despite all that bleach, despite all that scrubbing, despite all that desperate attempt to erase the evidence, the truth remained. Because you can't completely eliminate biological evidence, no matter how much bleach you use. DNA is resilient. Blood leaves traces even after you think you've cleaned it all away. And investigators found what they were looking for. They found transfer stains. These are marks left when fluid spatters are wiped away. When blood or other bodily fluids hit a surface and then someone wipes them, it leaves a distinctive pattern. A smear that shows there was fluid there and someone tried to clean it. These transfer stains were throughout the apartment. And when they tested them, they matched Kynande's DNA. Let that sink in. The apartment where this 4-year-old girl lived was covered in transfer stains matching her DNA. The pattern of these stains suggested that a physical assault had taken place. According to police, someone had hurt Kynande in that apartment. She had bled. And then someone had tried desperately to clean up the evidence. But the horror didn't stop there. Investigators noticed something else deeply disturbing. Someone had thrown away most of Kynande's belongings. Her toys, her clothes, the things a 4-year-old girl would need if she was coming home. They were gone. Already discarded. As if whoever lived in that apartment knew that Kynande wouldn't need them anymore. As if they knew she wasn't coming back. Think about that from a parent's perspective. Your child goes missing. You're frantic, desperate, hoping against hope that they'll be found and brought home safely. Would you throw away their belongings? Would you dispose of their favorite toys, the clothes they'd need when they came home? Of course not. You'd keep everything ready for them. You'd keep their room exactly as it was, waiting for the moment they walked back through the door. But Kynande's parents didn't do that. They threw her things away. And there's only one reason you'd do that. If you knew she wasn't coming home. If you knew she was never going to need those toys or those clothes again. The police also noticed something in how Vartasha and Kevin talked about Kynande. They used the past tense. Not she is, but she was. Not she likes, but she liked. Past tense, as if Kynande was already gone. Already in the past, already dead. This is a linguistic tell that investigators are trained to watch for. Parents of genuinely missing children almost always use present tense, clinging to hope that their child is still alive somewhere. But parents who know their child is dead, who know they're not coming back, slip into past tense without even realizing it. Beyond the physical evidence and the linguistic tells, there was the behavior of Kynande's parents themselves. Police said they seemed completely uninterested in the case. They never called to ask for updates on the investigation. Think about that. Your 4-year-old daughter is missing, and you don't call the police every day asking if there's news? You don't demand to know what leads they're following? You don't beg them to do more, search harder, bring your baby home? Innocent parents of missing children are often described as relentlessly engaged with the investigation. They're calling constantly. They're organizing search parties. They're talking to media. They're doing everything humanly possible to find their child. But Vartasha and Kevin? Silence. Disinterest. As if they already knew there was no point in searching because they knew exactly where Kynande was. Investigators asked both parents to take polygraph tests. These aren't admissible in court, but they're useful investigative tools that can help guide an investigation. Vartasha agreed to take the test. According to police, she failed. Kevin refused to take one at all. Both parents were described as uncooperative, and there were significant inconsistencies in their stories about what happened. After Vartasha failed her polygraph, investigators confronted her with the results. They told her they knew she wasn't telling the truth. And that's when something remarkable happened. She began crying. The emotional wall she'd maintained started to crack. One of the officers saw an opening and took it. They said to her, "We both know that whatever happened to that child did not happen in North Carolina. It happened in that apartment, didn't it?" And Vartasha nodded yes. She nodded. She acknowledged, non-verbally, that something had happened to Kynande in the apartment in Conway. She admitted, in that moment, that the entire Kmart story was a lie. She admitted that her daughter hadn't disappeared in North Carolina at all. The investigators pressed their advantage. They asked her to take them to where Kynande's body was. They gave her the opportunity to do the right thing, to bring this little girl home, to let her family bury her with dignity and love. Vartasha's response? "I can't. Not I don't know. Not I didn't do anything to her. Just I can't." As if she knew where Kynande was but couldn't or wouldn't say. As if there was some reason, whether fear or shame or legal strategy, that prevented her from telling the truth. And then, after she regained her composure, after she had time to think about what she'd just admitted, Vartasha retracted everything. She went back to her original story. She said Kynande had disappeared from Kmart in Whiteville. She denied that anything had happened in the apartment. She denied that she knew anything about where her daughter was. But it was too late. The damage was done. That nod, that acknowledgement, combined with all the physical evidence, gave investigators what they needed. In February 2003, 5 months after Kynande disappeared, both Vartasha McCullough and Kevin Bennett Jr. were arrested and charged with homicide by child abuse in connection with their daughter's case. The charges were serious, carrying significant prison time. The state was alleging that these parents had killed their 4-year-old daughter. The evidence supporting the charges was substantial. The DNA evidence proved that Kynande had died in Conway, not in Whiteville. She never went to North Carolina on September 29th. The entire trip, the entire story about visiting her uncle, the entire Kmart narrative, all of it was an elaborate lie designed to create distance between where Kynande actually died and where she was reported missing. Why create that distance? Because it's harder for police to investigate a crime scene when they don't know where it is. If Kynande disappeared in North Carolina but died in South Carolina, investigators might waste time searching in the wrong state. They might not think to search the apartment in Conway because they believe the crime, if there was one, happened somewhere else. But the DNA evidence destroyed that strategy. The blood, the transfer stains, the physical evidence in the apartment proved that whatever happened to Kynande happened there, in her own home, in the place where she should have been safest. Combined with the evidence from Kynande's grandparents, who had reported their concerns about abuse on the very day she was reported missing, and the witness accounts of bruises and cuts and Kynande's own words, "My mommy did it." The case against the parents was strong. But here's where it gets complicated. In October 2005, 3 years after the arrests, the charges against Kevin were dropped. The prosecution determined they didn't have enough evidence to proceed against him specifically. They couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had killed Kynande or that he was directly responsible for her death. The charges could be refiled if more evidence was located. But for now, Kevin was free. That left Vartasha alone to face trial for their daughter's death. In December 2005, additional charges were added to her indictment: unlawful neglect of a child and inflicting great bodily harm on a child. These charges reflected the pattern of abuse that had been documented before Kynande's disappearance, the bruises and cuts and injuries that witnesses had seen, the violence that 4-year-old had described with those 3 heartbreaking words. The trial began in early 2006. Vartasha maintained her innocence. She testified in her own defense, stating she never harmed Kynande, that she didn't know what happened to her daughter, that Kynande really had disappeared from Kmart just like she'd said from the beginning. But the prosecution had a different theory. They argued that Vartasha had been abusing Kynande for some time, that the abuse had escalated, and that at some point in late September 2002, Vartasha had caused Kynande's death, probably unintentionally in the course of disciplining her too harshly. They theorized that Vartasha had then panicked, realizing what she'd done, and had attempted to conceal the crime. The bleach, the cleaning, the disposal of Kynande's belongings, the fake trip to North Carolina, the Kmart story. All of it was an elaborate cover-up to hide the fact that she'd killed her daughter. The jury heard all the evidence. They heard about the bruises Kynande had, about her saying, "My mommy did it," They heard about the apartment reeking of bleach. They heard about the transfer stains matching Kynande's DNA. They heard about the toys and clothes that had been thrown away. They heard about Vartash's failed polygraph and her nod of acknowledgement when asked if something happened in the apartment. They heard about the surveillance footage showing no sign of Kynande at Kmart. They heard about the car with no car seat and almost no evidence that a child had been there. And in February 2006, the jury reached their verdict. Guilty. Guilty on all charges. Homicide by child abuse, unlawful neglect of a child, inflicting great bodily harm on a child. Vartasha McCullough was sentenced to 20 years in prison for killing her 4-year-old daughter and trying to cover it up. 20 years for a life that had barely begun. 20 years for extinguishing a bright, intelligent, well-mannered little girl who could read and count and loved SpongeBob SquarePants. 20 years for the bruises and the cuts and the terror that Kynande must have felt living with a mother who hurt her. But here's the tragedy that continues to this day, more than 2 decades after Kynande disappeared. Her body has never been found. Despite the conviction, despite Vartasha serving time in prison for killing her, despite all the evidence proving that Kynande died in that apartment in Conway, no one knows where her remains are. Vartasha has never told anyone what she did with Kynande's body. She's never led police to a location. She's never confessed to where she put her daughter after she died. That information, that crucial piece of closure, died with Kynande or remains locked in Vartasha's mind. A secret she's chosen to keep even while serving a prison sentence. Where is Kynande? What did Vartasha do with her body? These are questions that haunt everyone involved in this case. Did she bury her somewhere? Did she dispose of her in water? Did she leave her in a dumpster? Did she take her somewhere remote and hidden? Without Vartasha providing answers, without someone coming forward with information, Kynande's physical location remains a mystery. This means Kynande's family has never been able to give her a proper burial. They've never been able to visit her grave. They've never been able to say goodbye in the way that brings closure. They know she's dead. They know who killed her. They know that person is in prison. But they don't have their granddaughter, their niece, their family member back. They can't lay her to rest with dignity and love. They can't honor her memory in the way she deserves. And Kynande herself, wherever her remains are, hasn't been treated with the respect and care that every human being deserves, especially an innocent 4-year-old child. She's somewhere out there, undiscovered, alone. Her final resting place unknown to everyone except the person who put her there. If you're still watching at this point, I need you to comment, "I am here right now." This case is heartbreaking, and it's important that we keep Kynande's memory alive, that we don't forget this intelligent, sweet little girl who deserved so much better than what she got. Your engagement helps keep these cases in the public consciousness and reminds families that people still care. So drop that comment and let's continue. Let's talk about the pattern of child abuse that preceded Kynande's death, because understanding that pattern helps us understand how tragedies like this happen and, crucially, how we might prevent them in the future. Witnesses had seen bruises on Kynande's face and shoulder. They'd seen cuts on her body. They'd seen marks that appeared to have been caused by a strap or belt. These weren't accidents. These weren't the normal bumps and bruises that active children get from playing. These were injuries inflicted by an adult on a small child. And when confronted about it, when a witness had the courage to ask Kynande what happened, this 4-year-old told the truth. She didn't make excuses. She didn't lie to protect her mother. She said, simply and directly, "My mommy did it." That takes incredible courage for a child that age. She knew telling would likely make things worse for her. She knew her mother would be angry, but she told the truth anyway. And what happened? Her mother threatened to hurt her more for talking. This is the cycle of abuse. The abuser hurts the victim. The victim tells someone. The abuser retaliates, making it clear that telling results in more pain. The victim learns to stay silent, and the abuse continues, escalating until something terrible happens. Kynande's grandparents knew something was wrong. They were worried enough about their granddaughter that they went to police on September 29th, the same day she was reported missing, to report their concerns about abuse. But by then it was already too late. If they had gone sooner, if they had intervened more forcefully, if they had demanded that Child Protective Services investigate, would Kynande still be alive? It's impossible to know. And it's not fair to blame grandparents who were clearly concerned and trying to help. The person responsible for Kynande's death is the person who killed her. But this case does raise important questions about when and how we intervene when we suspect a child is being abused. The witness who saw the bruises and confronted Vanishes about them, did they report it to authorities? Or did they just confront the mother and leave it at that? If they had called Child Protective Services, if they had made an official report, would that have triggered an investigation that could have saved Kynande's life? These are the agonizing what-ifs that haunt everyone connected to cases like this. What if someone had done more? What if the system had responded differently? What if? But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it and try to do better going forward. And one of the lessons from Kynande's case is this. If you see a child with suspicious injuries, report it. Don't just confront the parent. Don't just ask the child what happened and then leave it alone. Call Child Protective Services. Call the police. Make an official report. Because that official report creates a paper trail, triggers an investigation, and could literally save a child's life. Yes, you might be wrong. The injuries might be innocent. The parent might be loving and careful. You might feel foolish for reporting something that turns out to be nothing. But better to be wrong and embarrassed than to stay silent and have a child die because you didn't want to get involved. Kynande told people what was happening to her. She said, "My mommy did it. She gave witnesses the information they needed to protect her. But she still ended up dead, her body hidden, her short life ended by the person who should have protected her above all others." Let's examine what we know and what we don't know about the final days of Kynande's life. We know that at some point in late September 2002, probably on September 27th or 28th, based on the timeline of when she was last seen by people other than her parents, something happened in that apartment in Conway. We know, based on the DNA evidence, the transfer stains, the pattern of blood evidence, that a physical assault occurred. We know that Kynande was hurt badly enough that she bled significantly. Did Vanishes beat her in a moment of rage? Did she discipline her too harshly, not realizing she was causing serious injury? Did she intentionally kill her daughter? Or was it an accident that went too far? We don't know the exact sequence of events because Vanishes has never provided a full, truthful account of what happened. What we can infer is that at some point, Kynande died from her injuries. And Vanishes, realizing what she'd done or what had happened, made a choice. She chose to cover it up. She chose to hide her daughter's body. She chose to clean the apartment with bleach, trying to eliminate the evidence. She chose to throw away Kynande's belongings. She chose to create an elaborate lie about a trip to North Carolina and a disappearance at Kmart. All of those choices required planning, effort, and a cold calculation that it was better to hide what happened than to call for help, tell the truth, and face the consequences. Even if Kynande's death was truly an accident, the cover-up was not. The cover-up was deliberate, calculated, and cruel. And throughout all of this, where was Kevin, Kynande's father? The charges against him were dropped, which suggests prosecutors didn't have enough evidence to prove he directly participated in killing Kynande or hiding her body. But he lived in that apartment. He must have known that Kynande was gone. He must have seen the frantic cleaning. He must have noticed that his daughter's belongings were being thrown away. He participated in the lie about the trip to North Carolina and the Kmart disappearance. So even if he didn't kill Kynande, even if he wasn't directly responsible for her death, he was complicit in the cover-up. He helped maintain the lie. He didn't come forward and tell the truth about what happened. And that makes him, at minimum, a moral accomplice to whatever happened to his daughter. The decision to drop charges against him might have been a pragmatic one. Maybe prosecutors needed Vanishes to be the sole defendant so they could focus the jury's attention on her actions and her inconsistent stories. Maybe they didn't have enough evidence to prove Kevin's involvement beyond a reasonable doubt. Maybe they hoped that by dropping charges against him, he might eventually cooperate and provide information about what happened. But as far as we know, Kevin has never come forward with the full truth. He's never explained what he knew and when he knew it. He's never told authorities where Kynande's body is. He walked away from criminal charges, but not from the moral stain of what happened to his daughter. Let's think about Kynande herself and what her short life was like. She was intelligent, reading simple words at age 4. That's advanced for her age. She was well-mannered, which tells us she'd been taught how to behave, how to interact with others politely. She could count to 30. She loved SpongeBob SquarePants just like millions of other kids her age. In so many ways, she was a normal 4-year-old. curious, learning, growing, developing her personality and interests. But she was also living in a home where she was being hurt, where the person who was supposed to care for her, protect her, love her unconditionally, was instead causing her pain. What must that have been like for her? To love your mother but also fear her? To want her comfort and protection but know that she might hurt you? To not understand why you're being hit, why you have bruises, why your body hurts. 4-year-olds don't have the cognitive framework to understand abuse. They just know they're scared and in pain, and the person they depend on for everything is the source of that fear and pain. Kynande had those small braids tied with bows and barrettes. Someone took the time to style her hair like that. It takes hours to braid a 4-year-old's hair into small braids and tie each one with decorations. That's an act of care, of attention, of wanting your daughter to look pretty and well cared for. But that same person was also beating her, leaving bruises significant enough that witnesses noticed and commented. The contradiction is staggering. You care enough about your daughter's appearance to spend hours on her hair, but you don't care enough about her well-being to stop hurting her? It speaks to a compartmentalization that's difficult to understand, an ability to present a facade of being a good parent while simultaneously abusing your child. Or maybe the careful hairstyling was part of the cover-up. Maybe Varsha knew people would see bruises and cuts, and she wanted Kynande to look well cared for in other ways to deflect suspicion. Look at how nicely I do her hair. Look at how well dressed she is. I must be a good mother. Meanwhile, underneath those nice clothes and pretty hairstyle, Kynande was covered in injuries. The birthmark shaped like a seashell on Kynande's arm is a detail that breaks my heart. Such a distinctive, unique feature. In a different life, it would be something special, something that made Kynande uniquely herself. Her parents might have told her stories about how the birthmark was magical, how it meant she was special. She might have grown up proud of it, showing it to friends, incorporating it into her sense of identity. Instead, that birthmark became an identifier for a missing child, a distinguishing characteristic that might help someone recognize her remains if they're ever found. It went from being a unique feature of a living, loved child to being a forensic marker in a death investigation. Kynande's pierced ears tell a similar story. Someone took her to get her ears pierced, probably when she was a baby or toddler. It's a common thing parents do, wanting their little girl to be able to wear pretty earrings. It's an act of love and care. But again, that same child whose parents cared enough to pierce her ears was being beaten regularly. The contradictions are painful to contemplate. Everything about Kynande suggests she should have had a normal, happy childhood. She was smart and well-mannered and loved cartoons. She had a family who should have cherished her. She had a grandmother and grandfather who cared enough about her to report concerns to police. She had witnesses who noticed something was wrong and tried to intervene. But none of it was enough. All the potential, all the promise, all the possibility of who Kynande might have become was extinguished before she even started kindergarten. We'll never know what she could have achieved, who she might have grown up to be, what contributions she might have made to the world. All of that was stolen from her by the very person who should have protected her above all others. Varsha McCullough was sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2006. Depending on how much of that sentence she was required to actually serve, she may be free now or will be soon. 20 years sounds like a long time, but it's not nearly enough for what she did. 20 years for killing a 4-year-old child, for covering it up, for hiding the body, for lying to investigators, for never telling anyone where her daughter is. 20 years for extinguishing a life that had barely begun and depriving a family of the closure they desperately need. Think about what 20 years means in practical terms. If Varsha was in her 20s or 30s when she was convicted in 2006, she could be in her 40s or 50s now. She could be released and still have decades of life ahead of her. She could get a job, make friends, maybe even have other children someday. She gets to live her life while Kynande never got the chance to live hers. And throughout her entire prison sentence, Varsha has apparently never told anyone where Kynande is. She's never made a full confession detailing what happened that day in the apartment. She's never shown any remorse or willingness to give Kynande's family the one thing they desperately need: the location of her daughter's remains so they can bring her home and bury her properly. This is a special kind of cruelty, this refusal to provide that final piece of information. Even after being convicted, even after being sentenced, even after losing everything, Varsha maintains control over the one thing the family wants most. She knows where Kynande is, and she's chosen to keep that secret. Whether it's out of spite or shame or fear, or some twisted need to maintain power, the result is the same. Kynande's family can't have closure. Where could Kynande be? This is the question that haunts everyone involved in this case. Conway, South Carolina is a small city, the county seat of Horry County, with a population of around 17,000 people in 2002. It's not a huge metropolitan area where a body could easily be hidden in the urban sprawl, but it's also in a region with plenty of rural areas, wooded land, and bodies of water where remains could be concealed. Did Vartasha bury Kynande somewhere? So where? In the woods somewhere outside of town? In a location that had personal significance? Somewhere she thought would never be developed or disturbed. Burying a body requires tools, time, and privacy. It requires digging a hole deep enough that animals won't disturb it, in a location where you won't be seen. For a woman acting alone, possibly in a panic, this would be challenging but not impossible. Did she dispose of Kynande in water? The area around Conway has rivers, creeks, ponds. Bodies placed in water can stay submerged for years or can be carried downstream to locations far from where they were originally placed. Water also accelerates decomposition, making remains harder to identify if they are eventually found. But water disposal also requires access to a body of water, transport of the body to that location, and weighing it down so it stays submerged. Did she place Kynande in a dumpster? This is perhaps the most heartbreaking possibility, that a mother could treat her daughter's body as garbage to be hauled away and buried in a landfill. But it would explain why the body has never been found. Landfills receive tons of garbage daily, and anything placed there is quickly buried under layers of waste. Searching a landfill for specific remains is nearly impossible without knowing exactly when and where the disposal occurred. Did she take Kynande somewhere more remote, further from Conway? Did she drive hours away to a location in another state, somewhere she thought would never be connected to her? This would require significant planning and time, but it would also reduce the chance of the body ever being found. Or is Kynande somewhere unexpected, somewhere close by that has simply never been searched? Sometimes in missing persons cases, remains are found in locations that were checked multiple times, places where searchers looked but didn't see anything. Bodies can be hidden in surprisingly small spaces or concealed in ways that make them invisible even to trained searchers. The frustrating reality is that without Vartasha telling investigators where she put Kynande, finding her remains is largely a matter of luck. Someone stumbling across them by accident, construction or development uncovering them, a drought exposing them, some random event that brings Kynande's final resting place to light. And with each year that passes, finding her becomes less likely. Evidence degrades. The landscape changes. Memory fades. What Vartasha remembers about where she put Kynande in 2002 might not be accurate anymore. She might not be able to lead investigators to the exact location even if she wanted to, because the landmarks she used to remember where it was might be gone. This is why it's so crucial that defendants in cases like this be required to reveal the location of remains as part of any plea deal or sentencing. Some states have laws requiring this, called no body, no parole laws, where convicted killers can't be released until they tell authorities where the victim is. But these laws are inconsistent and not in place everywhere. Vartasha was convicted in South Carolina in 2006 and apparently wasn't required to disclose Kynande's location as a condition of her sentence. That's a failure of the system. A failure that means Kynande is still missing more than 20 years later. Her family still without closure. Her body still alone wherever Vartasha left her. Let's talk about the impact this case has had on Kynande's extended family. Her grandparents, who were worried enough to go to police on the day she was reported missing, have had to live with the knowledge that they were right to be concerned but couldn't save her. They've had to live with the agony of not knowing where their granddaughter is. They've had to attend a trial and hear evidence about how their granddaughter died, but still couldn't get the one piece of information they needed most. Any siblings Kynande had, or cousins or other children in the family, have grown up knowing what happened to her. They know she was killed by her own mother. They know her body was hidden and never found. They know that someone they should have been able to trust, a family member, was capable of killing a child. That's a wound that doesn't heal, a knowledge that shapes how you see the world and how you trust people. The community of Conway has been affected as well. Child murders shake communities to their core, especially in smaller cities where everyone feels connected. The knowledge that a 4-year-old girl was being abused and killed while living among them, that witnesses saw signs of abuse but the child still died, that creates a sense of collective guilt and failure. Could we have done more? Should we have noticed something? How did this happen here? And there's the broader impact on how cases like this are handled. Kynande's case became a teaching example for investigators, prosecutors, and child protective services workers. It shows the importance of physical evidence in child abuse cases. It shows how abusers try to cover their crimes. It shows the linguistic tells that suggest someone knows a missing person is actually dead. It shows the patterns of behavior that can help identify when a missing child case is actually a homicide. But none of that academic or professional impact brings Kynande back. None of it gives her family closure. None of it changes the fundamental tragedy of what happened. A bright, intelligent, loving 4-year-old girl was beaten to death by her mother. Her body was hidden, and more than 2 decades later no one knows where she is. The prosecution's theory at trial was that Vartasha caused Kynande's death unintentionally during a beating, then panicked and tried to cover it up. This theory makes sense given the evidence and the pattern of abuse. Vartasha had been hitting Kynande for some time, leaving bruises and cuts. On one occasion in late September, she hit her too hard or too many times, and Kynande died from the injuries. Vartasha would have realized immediately what happened. Her daughter, the child she'd given birth to and raised for 4 years, was dead, and it was her fault. She could call 911, admit what happened, try to get help even though it was too late. She could face the consequences of her actions, the arrest, the trial, the prison time, or she could try to hide it, try to make it look like Kynande disappeared rather than died, try to create reasonable doubt about what happened, try to escape accountability for what she'd done. She chose the cover-up. She chose to hide her daughter's body, clean the apartment with bleach, throw away Kynande's belongings, create a fake story about a trip to North Carolina, and report her daughter missing from a Kmart where she'd never been. All of those choices were deliberate, calculated, and showed a cold willingness to prioritize her own freedom over her daughter's dignity and her family's need for closure. Even if we accept that Kynande's death was unintentional, that Vartasha didn't mean to kill her, the cover-up is unforgivable. The choice to hide a 4-year-old's body like it was evidence to be disposed of rather than a child who deserved to be mourned and buried with love. That's a choice that reveals someone's true character. And Vartasha's character, as shown by her choices in the aftermath of Kynande's death, is deeply disturbing. Let me address something that might be in viewers' minds. Why didn't Kevin, Kynande's father, come forward with the truth? Even if he wasn't directly responsible for her death, he must have known something. He lived in that apartment. He would have noticed that his daughter was gone, that the apartment smelled like bleach, that Kynande's belongings were being thrown away. He participated in the lie about the trip to North Carolina and the Kmart disappearance. There are a few possible explanations. Maybe he genuinely didn't know what happened. Maybe Vartasha killed Kynande while he was out of the apartment, hid the body without his knowledge, and he believed her story about the Kmart disappearance. This seems unlikely given that he lived there and would have noticed all the signs of the cover-up, but it's possible. Maybe he knew what happened but was afraid of Vartasha. Domestic violence doesn't only go one direction, and it's possible Kevin was also a victim of abuse and too scared to come forward with the truth. Again, this seems unlikely given the evidence, but it's within the realm of possibility. Or maybe he was complicit. Maybe he knew exactly what happened, helped with the cover-up, and has simply managed to avoid prosecution because there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. Maybe prosecutors made a strategic decision to focus on Vartasha as the primary perpetrator, knowing they could prove she killed Kynande even if they couldn't prove Kevin's exact role. Whatever the truth, Kevin has never come forward publicly with a full account of what he knew and when he knew it. He's never told authorities where Kynande is. He's never given an interview explaining his side of the story. He's maintained silence, whether out of guilt or fear or legal strategy or some other reason. And that silence means another person who could provide answers, who could tell Kynande's family where she is, who could give them closure, has chosen not to. It's another layer of cruelty in a case that's already overflowing with it. Let's think about what justice would actually look like in this case. Vartasha was convicted and sentenced to prison, which is important. Someone was held accountable for killing Kynande. The criminal justice system functioned in a basic sense. A jury heard the evidence, reached a verdict, and a sentence was imposed. But is that really justice? Justice would mean Kynande was alive. Justice would mean she never suffered abuse in the first place. Justice would mean the system intervened before it was too late, protected her, removed her from a dangerous situation. Justice would mean she got to grow up, go to school, make friends, experience all the joys and challenges of childhood and adolescence and adulthood. None of that happened. None of that can ever happen. So we're left with a much more limited form of justice. Someone being held accountable after the fact, after all the harm has already been done, after a child is already dead. And even that limited justice is incomplete, because Kynande's body was never found. Her family never got to bury her. They never got to say goodbye properly. They never got the closure that comes with being able to visit a grave and know that's where their loved one rests. True justice in this case would require Varstasha to tell the truth about where Kynande is. It would require her to show enough remorse, enough humanity, enough basic decency to give this family the one thing they need most. But she hasn't done that. And as long as she maintains her silence, justice remains incomplete. Some people might ask, does it really matter where the body is? Kynande is dead either way. Knowing where she is won't bring her back. Why is finding remains so important to the family? If you've never lost someone, especially if you've never lost someone to violence or had a loved one go missing, it might be hard to understand. But the need to recover remains, to have a body to bury, is deep and primal. It's about honoring the person who died. It's about having a place to visit where you feel close to them. It's about the ritual of saying goodbye, of marking their passing with ceremony and respect. It's also about closure in a psychological sense. When someone is missing, when you don't know where they are, part of your brain maintains hope that they might still be alive. Even when you intellectually know they're dead, even when someone's been convicted of killing them, that tiny irrational hope persists. But when you recover remains, when you can see with your own eyes that the person is gone, it allows you to fully accept their death and begin to grieve properly. Kynande's family has been denied that closure for more than 20 years. They know she's dead. They know how she died and who killed her. But they don't have her body. They don't have that final confirmation, that ability to lay her to rest, that place to visit and remember her. And that denial of closure is its own form of torture, one that continues day after day, year after year, for decades. Varstasha has the power to end that torture with a single conversation with investigators. She could tell them where Kynande is. She could finally do one decent thing after all the terrible things she did. But she hasn't. And every day she maintains that silence is another day she's choosing cruelty over compassion, control over kindness, her own interests over her daughter's dignity and her family's peace. Let me talk about some of the systemic issues this case reveals. Because Kynande's story isn't just about one terrible mother and one tragic death. It's about gaps in our systems that fail to protect children. First, there's the issue of how child abuse reports are handled. Multiple people saw signs that Kynande was being abused. At least 2 witnesses saw bruises, cuts, and marks on her body. One heard Kynande say, "My mommy did it." One confronted Varstasha about the abuse. Kynande's grandparents were concerned enough to contact police. But did anyone file a formal report with Child Protective Services before Kynande disappeared? Did any of those concerned adults initiate an investigation that could have resulted in Kynande being removed from an abusive home? We don't know the full details, but given that Kynande remained in her parents' custody until she died, it seems that either no one filed a formal report, or if they did, it wasn't investigated thoroughly enough to result in intervention. This is a common problem in child abuse cases. People see signs, they're concerned, but they don't follow through with formal reports. Maybe they think it's not their place. Maybe they're afraid of being wrong. Maybe they confront the parent directly and think that's enough. But confronting an abuser directly can actually make things worse for the child, as we saw when Varstasha threatened to whip her ass for telling someone about the abuse. The solution is clear. If you suspect child abuse, file a formal report with Child Protective Services or law enforcement. Don't just confront the parent. Don't just talk to other family members. Make an official report that creates a paper trail and triggers an investigation. Yes, you might be wrong. Yes, it might be uncomfortable. But the alternative, staying silent while a child continues to be abused, is unacceptable. Second, there's the issue of how missing children cases are investigated. When Kynande was first reported missing, The initial assumption was probably that she really had disappeared from Kmart. It's a plausible story on the surface. Children do sometimes wander away from parents in stores. It happens. But investigators should always be skeptical of parent reports when a child goes missing. They should look for evidence that confirms or contradicts the parent's story. They should check surveillance footage, interview witnesses, look for any physical evidence that supports the claim. In this case, that skepticism and thorough investigation paid off. The lack of surveillance footage, the absence of witnesses, the condition of the apartment, all of it pointed to the truth. Kynande never went to Kmart. She died days earlier in her home. But this kind of thorough investigation requires resources, training, and time. Not every law enforcement agency has the capabilities to conduct this level of investigation. Smaller departments might not have specialized child abuse investigators. They might not have the forensic resources to process a crime scene effectively. They might not have the experience to recognize the signs that a parent is lying about a child's disappearance. This means some cases fall through the cracks. Some children who are killed by their parents are never found because the investigation doesn't dig deep enough, doesn't question the parent's story thoroughly enough, doesn't process the evidence effectively enough. Kynande was lucky, if you can call it that investigators in her case were thorough and skilled enough to build a case that resulted in a conviction. But not every child is that lucky. Third, there's the issue of sentences for child killers. 20 years for killing a 4-year-old child seems, to most people, grossly inadequate. Why not life in prison? Why not a longer sentence that ensures the killer spends the majority of their remaining life behind bars? The answer has to do with how the criminal justice system works, how charges are structured, and how sentences are determined. Homicide by child abuse is a specific charge that carries a specific sentencing range. Prosecutors work within that range, and judges impose sentences based on sentencing guidelines, aggravating and mitigating factors, and legal precedent. But maybe those sentencing ranges need to be re-examined. Maybe child killers should face mandatory minimum sentences that reflect the heinous nature of killing someone who trusted you, who depended on you, who couldn't defend themselves. Maybe there should be enhancements for factors like hiding the body or refusing to disclose its location. These are policy questions that legislators need to grapple with. But they're questions worth asking, because cases like Kynande's reveal that our current sentencing structures might not adequately reflect the severity of these crimes or provide adequate deterrence or justice. Fourth, there's the issue of requiring killers to disclose the location of remains. As I mentioned earlier, some states have no body, no parole laws. These laws say that if you're convicted of murder and you refuse to tell authorities where the victim's body is, you can't be paroled. You serve your full sentence with no possibility of early release unless you cooperate and reveal the location. These laws make sense. They incentivize convicted killers to do the right thing and give families closure. They recognize that refusing to disclose the location of remains is an ongoing harm to the victim's family, a continuation of the crime that deserves to be punished. But not all states have these laws, and even in states that do, they're not always applied consistently. Vartasha was convicted in South Carolina, and it's unclear whether similar laws were in place or applicable to her case. But the fact that she's apparently never disclosed Kynande's location, and there don't seem to be ongoing consequences for that refusal, suggests the law didn't require or incentivize her to cooperate. This is something that needs to change nationally. Every state should have laws that require convicted killers to disclose the location of remains as a condition of parole or any early release. Families deserve that closure. Victims deserve that dignity. And killers who refuse to provide that basic decency deserve to serve every single day of their sentence. Now, as we approach the end of the story, I want to come back to Kynande herself. Because in cases like this, it's easy to get caught up in the legal proceedings, the investigation, the evidence, the trial. We focus on what was done to the victim and who did it and what punishment they received. And while all of that is important, it can sometimes overshadow the person at the center of it all. Kynande was not just a victim. She was not just a case file or a statistic or a cautionary tale. She was a 4-year-old girl with a personality, with likes and dislikes, with thoughts and feelings and dreams. She was intelligent, already reading at 4 years old. She was well-mannered, polite, respectful. She loved SpongeBob SquarePants and probably laughed at his silly adventures. She had small braids with bows and barrettes. Someone, probably her mother, spent time styling her hair that way. She wore a gray FUBU t-shirt, blue jeans, white socks, and black sneakers the last time she was seen. These are the clothes of a normal kid, comfortable play clothes that a 4-year-old would wear on an ordinary day. She had pierced ears and a birthmark shaped like a seashell. These physical details are important for identification purposes, but they're also part of what made Kynande unique, what made her herself. If she had lived, that seashell birthmark might have become a source of pride for her, a special mark that set her apart. She might have made up stories about it, told friends it meant she was destined to love the ocean or that she had a connection to the sea. But she never got the chance to develop that relationship with her own body, her own identity, her own sense of self. She never got to grow up and become whoever she might have been. All that potential, all that promise, all that possibility was extinguished before she even started kindergarten. If Kynande had lived, she would be 27 years old now, born on August 24th, 1998. She could be a college graduate, pursuing a career, maybe even a parent herself. She could be anywhere, doing anything, living a full and rich life. Instead, she's been gone for more than 22 years. Her body hidden somewhere, her family still grieving, still searching for closure. This is what was stolen from Kynande, her future. Every birthday she never celebrated. Every Christmas morning she never experienced. Every first day of school. Every friendship. Every heartbreak. Every triumph. Every ordinary day of an ordinary life. All of it taken from her by someone who should have protected her above all others. And this is what was stolen from Kynande's family. The opportunity to watch her grow up, to see who she would become, to be part of her life and have her be part of theirs, to make memories with her, celebrate milestones with her, support her through challenges and rejoice in her successes. They've been robbed of more than 2 decades of relationship with this child they loved. And they've been robbed of the closure that would come from being able to visit her grave and honor her memory properly. If you've watched this entire video, thank you. Thank you for caring about Kynande. Thank you for listening to her story. Thank you for being someone who believes that every child, especially the most vulnerable children, deserves justice and protection and dignity. Now I need you to do something. Hit that like button right now. Show Kynande's family that people still care about her case, that she hasn't been forgotten, that there are people all over who are heartbroken by what happened to her and who believe she deserved so much better. Subscribe to Cold Case Unsealed and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. We're committed to telling the stories of forgotten victims, especially children who couldn't defend themselves and who were failed by the systems that should have protected them. Your subscription helps us continue this important work. And drop a comment. Tell us what you think about this case. Share your anger at how Vanishes has never revealed where Kynande is. Share your sadness for a little girl who loved SpongeBob SquarePants and could count to 30. Share your thoughts about what changes need to happen to prevent cases like this. Your engagement matters. It keeps these cases in the public consciousness. It reminds families that people care. And if you have any information about where Kynande might be, if you know anything that could help bring her home, please contact the Conway Police Department or the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Even after more than 20 years, even after a conviction, finding Kynande's remains would mean everything to her family. Give them that gift. Give them that closure. Help bring Kynande home. This is Cold Case Unsealed. We don't forget the forgotten. We don't let stories fade just because time has passed. We don't let victims become statistics. We remember their names, we tell their stories, and we demand that they receive the justice and dignity they deserve. Kynande deserved a childhood filled with love and laughter and learning. She deserved to grow up and experience all the beauty and complexity of life. She deserved parents who cherished her and protected her and would never, ever hurt her. She deserved better than she got in life, and she deserves better than she's gotten in death. Her body is still out there somewhere. Her family is still waiting for closure. And Vanishes, wherever she is now, still holds the key to giving them that closure. She could tell the truth. She could reveal where Kynande is. She could finally do one decent thing after all the terrible things she did. Will she? After more than 20 years of silence, it seems unlikely. But hope doesn't die easily. As long as there's a chance, as long as there's a possibility that Vanishes might have a change of heart or that someone else might come forward with information or that Kynande's remains might be discovered, hope persists. And so does the commitment to keep telling her story, keep demanding answers, keep insisting that she matters. Because she does matter. This intelligent, well-mannered 4-year-old girl with small braids and a seashell birthmark, who loved SpongeBob SquarePants and could count to 30, who deserved so much more than 4 short years of life that included pain and fear and ultimately death at the hands of someone who should have loved her most. Kynande matters. Her story matters. And we're not going to let her be forgotten. This is Cold Case Unsealed. We'll see you in the next case. And remember, if you know something, say something. Someone out there might have the information that could finally bring Kynande home. Be brave enough to come forward. Be compassionate enough to give her family peace. Be the person who finally ends 22 years of not knowing and brings this little girl back to the people who love her. Rest in peace, Kynande. You deserved so much better. We won't forget you.